Flames pressed against the carved cedar beams of the royal palace in Tirzah, spreading along the ceiling as if the building itself had decided it no longer wished to stand. Smoke rolled through the corridors, drowning the oil lamps in a haze so thick that the last servants crawled on their hands and knees to find a way out. Outside the palace walls, soldiers shouted for rams and shields clashed as Omri's forces pushed deeper into the city. Inside a locked chamber, surrounded by overturned tables and the shattered remnants of his brief power, King Zimri stood alone and listened to the enemy closing in. He had been king for 7 days. The air around him stank of burning resin and splintered wood, but beneath the smoke he could still smell the wine that had been spilled on the first night, the night he took the throne. The memory came back sharply, more vivid than the fire eating the walls around him. Elah, son of Baasha, had been drinking in the house of Arza, the palace steward. Lamps glowed over clay cups and sweating jugs as the king leaned on cushions, heavy with drink and unaware of the danger standing just outside the door. Zimri had entered with the ease of a trusted officer, commander of half the chariot forces of Israel. Guards at the door stepped aside without suspicion. Inside, Elah barely glanced at him. By the time he realized anything was wrong, Zimri's blade had already crossed the distance between them. The king died on the stone floor of a steward's house, not in battle, not on a throne, but in a dim room with wine on his breath and no one to warn him. With the king dead, Zimri moved fast. The palace guards, stunned and leaderless, bent to the man holding the royal seal. In a few hours, Zimri seized authority and declared himself king, but the prophecy spoken years earlier over the house of Baasha demanded a fuller reckoning. Baasha had slaughtered the family of Jeroboam. The prophet Jehu, son of Hanani, had announced that Baasha's own line would fall the same way, cut down without survivors. Zimri enforced that judgment with ruthless speed. Men loyal to him swept through Tirzah, forcing open doors, dragging out relatives, cousins, stewards, and any man tied by blood or political loyalty to Baasha's house. Word spread quietly from household to household, voices lowered, children pulled back from windows. By the time the sun rose again, Baasha's dynasty was gone. Zimri sat alone on a throne no longer contested by any heir. But a crown taken by murder rarely sits without challenge. While Zimri secured Tirzah, Israel's army was still camped far away, laying siege to the Philistine city of Gibbethon. When riders reached the camp with news of Elah's death, the soldiers looked not toward Tirzah, but toward Omri. He was their commander, hardened by years of war, liked by the men who fought beside him, trusted by officers who had watched Elah drink while they bled, on that dry field outside Gibbethon, surrounded by siege works and dust. The army raised Omri as king. There was no ceremony, no palace, just soldiers who knew whom they would follow. Omri took part of the force and marched toward Tirzah. Riders carried the news ahead of him, and the people of the surrounding towns watched the dust rising on the horizon. They knew 2 kings now claimed Israel. Only one would survive the week. In Tirzah, Zimri received word that Omri was coming. He knew immediately what it meant. The army's loyalty had never been his. His power rested on a palace, not on soldiers who had fought under Omri's command. The city gates lacked the manpower to withstand a real siege, and once the walls fell, all the men he had ordered to murder Baasha's house would gladly trade Zimri's life to spare their own. When Omri's forces arrived, they wasted no time. Battering rams struck the wooden gates, sending shouts echoing through the narrow streets. Arrows arced toward the walls. The defenders, already shaken, struggled to mount a coordinated resistance. Smoke from burning storehouses drifted across the city. People fled into alleyways, carrying children on their backs as soldiers clashed in the open courtyards. Inside the palace, Zimri understood the hopelessness of his position. He had made himself king by killing one ruler and exterminating his line. He knew exactly what awaited him if Omri broke through: public execution, humiliation, and the undoing of every act he had carried out in the name of prophecy and power. The fire burning in the distance outside the palace was nothing compared to the one tightening around him. He walked through the royal residence, passing corridors lined with cedar panels and curtains embroidered during his predecessor's reign. Servants fled when they saw him. Some ducked through side doors, unwilling to be in the same room when the final moment arrived. Others stood frozen, afraid of choosing the wrong direction. Zimri dismissed them with a single wave. They would live or die depending on which army reached them first. He entered the inner section of the palace, the most fortified, but also the most flammable. Cedar beams, dry plaster, thick hangings, oil jars stacked for lamps. Zimri had little left to command, but he could still choose how his story ended. He overturned jugs, letting oil spill across the floor and down the steps of the inner stair. He touched a torch to a curtain. The flame climbed quickly, catching the beam above it, spreading with hungry precision through the palace rafters. Outside, Omri's soldiers saw the smoke rising from the heart of the palace. Some thought the defenders were setting traps. Others guessed the truth immediately. The crowd's shouting shifted. The roar of the attack slowed as men watched the fire grow higher. The palace, the place where kings had sat for decades, was becoming a funeral pyre before their eyes. Inside those burning halls, Zimri stayed. Whether he prayed, cursed, or simply waited for the flames to reach him, no one recorded. But the decision was clear. He refused to face Omri. He refused to stand trial for his coup or answer for the blood he had shed. After 7 days seated on a throne taken through murder, he died inside the palace he had tried to claim. When the fire finally collapsed the structure, Omri's men entered the ruins. They found charred beams, cracked stone, and the blackened remains of the usurper who had declared himself king for a single week. Zimri's death cleared the way for Omri's rule, though Israel soon divided again, some following Omri, others backing a rival named Tibni. Civil conflict followed, and only after years did Omri fully secure the kingdom. But the story of Zimri remained a grim reminder spoken in the years that followed. A man who rose by blood ended in flames. A king who seized power through treachery ruled only long enough to see judgment close around him. 7 days of a throne, 7 days of authority, 7 days before the fire claimed everything he had taken. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.